Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Before we get started, we've got the little disclaimer we need to read. Information and resources shared are not intended as and shall not be understood or construed as medical or health advice. Information shared is not a substitute for medical advice from a professional who is aware of the facts and circumstances of your individual situation. So, thank you all for joining me today. We're going to have another conversation that they're all hard, aren't they? But there's different pieces for everybody. Today, I want to talk about the long farewell, grieving with the dying. And I'm joined by some amazing women, Robin Stegall, Dawn Lauren Anderson, Kathryn Tate-Hildreth, and Sandy Kay. And I'm so glad you're all here with me. So let's kick this off. We've all had our own experiences with this, and some have been more recent, some are more distant. When you think about something perhaps would have been helpful for you to know, or a tip or suggestion, is there anything you might say to someone who's going through this? Because we're all very aware, being with someone we love who's dying, it's anguish. And if we can give someone a soft place to come to.
Well, I feel like for me, I had two cases that this happened. One was my father, which was over, I'm not even sure how many years. And then my last husband also. So my father was a heart valve replacement failing. And then my husband was a cancer situation. So when I think back about my father, which was he died in 2015, so that was a while ago. He just changed so much when he had to go on oxygen 100%. You know, he had been making knives, which involved fire and, things he couldn't do anymore. And that was really his whole life, pretty much. And yeah, he had a pretty positive outlook about most things. And if I look back, he used to tell stories a lot, but I think once he got on oxygen, he didn't do it as much, which is kind of interesting. It was almost like he felt like he was closer, I guess, to the end, and maybe he didn't want to go back and think about things that were so long ago. But I always felt like the most important thing was to just enjoy the time with him. And, whatever he could do to facilitate that. So we could go out to eat because we could take a tank with us, and he liked doing that. So we would do that, like once a month or something. And I did not focus on how his life had changed. I have to say that was not my focus.
Dawn, that's so interesting. Say more about that.
Yeah, because it was like when he was out in the shop making knives, I was never with him. I never did that with him. It was just something I wasn't interested in. And so to me, it was much better situation because he was in the house all the time, or where I usually was. I mean, sometimes I would go for walks up into the mountains, and this was in Colorado, but for the most part, we spent most of the time in the house. And sometimes we'd play cards, or although I don't think he didn't like to play cards that much. So I don't remember him doing that. And maybe we would just be sitting there reading our own books, but we would just be together in the room. And I always found it to be joyful for me. I really did. And I remember toward the end, I took him and my mom on a ride to see some of the birds that were migrating, because this was in the San Luis Valley, which is one of the really big bird migration areas in the United States. And I remember, we went to this one place where supposedly they were nesting, but you could still look at them because it was kind of marshy stuff. And I remember I thought, he's going to love this. And you know what? He didn't. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was so surprising to me that he didn't enjoy it as much as I thought he would. And I think part of it was he felt more secure if he was at home, with the oxygen machine. So I think what I learned from that was don't assume that you know what's going to bring them joy. And then, I mean, the whole thing was, it wasn't going to last very long anyway. And so I probably cut it a little bit short before we got back. But, it just made me realize that just simply coming and seeing him was the best thing I could do.
What I hear from you is that you really focused on being in the moment.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, Robin, Sandy, Kathy, have you had similar experiences? Have yours been different? And as always, only share what you're comfortable sharing and to the degree you're comfortable sharing.
My mom passed away a few years ago, and she passed away from dementia. And so it'd been a handful of years that she'd been experiencing it. And we started seeing signs, and she didn't really want to admit it. She would just, ignore it and play it off and stuff. But we all saw it. But it got bad fast. It really did. And with her, it was really difficult because there were days where she would come over. I'd always have her come over here. My stepdad would bring her over here. And this way he could go and do whatever he needed to do at the house and stuff. And I'd take care of her here. There were days that she would come here and she'd realize, like, she would kind of understand that she's going through it and just cry. And it broke my heart. And I would just cry with her and just tell her, it's okay, Mom, and try to get her to focus on something else or get her to do something. And there were days, there goes my dogs. There were days where she'd come over and I'd play the role of her mom because she thought I was her mom. And there were days I was her sister. And then there were days where, it was me. Like, and she it was almost like a surprise to her. And she'd say, oh my gosh, Robin. And then she'd hug me and she'd say, you're my daughter, and start crying and stuff. And so it was really difficult. There were days where I would just have to wear whatever hat I needed to that day. So if I had to play the role of her mom, then I was very, mothering to her, just fed into whatever she needed at the time. One of the big things, looking back on it now, is going back to that self-care, because it is very trying. It's very exhausting at times, because when they leave, you just melt. You just have that meltdown and stuff. So I just remembered constantly reminding myself to take care of myself, because when I was with her, I put my game face on. And just, every day was different. Every day was different with her. I mean, some days she forgot to walk. Some days she forgot how to eat. So we just didn't know from each day, what we were gonna see.
And as I hear you, as I listen to you, and please correct me if I'm misunderstanding, I don't want to get anything wrong. I almost feel a certain level of anxiety too about what am I going to walk into today?
Exactly.
Not knowing who she might think that you are or not have any idea.
Mm-hmm.
the level of going to be today.
Because there were days where if I went over there, a lot of times I'd cry on the way home on my drive, or after she'd leave here, I'd cry. Because there were days where she would forget who I was. And then I would show her photo albums and we'd go through pointing out, who's who. And there were a few times where it just broke my heart that she didn't know who I was in the moment. And I would just have to tell myself, it's okay, like it's okay. And then you're playing that role of somebody else. And
I can only imagine how hard it was for you and feeling for her, because when we're confused or we can't put our finger on something, that's scary, isn't it?
mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of complicated stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot, Robin. And that can be, we're talking about grieving with the dying, but sometimes it's not necessarily the physical death right away, is it? It can be years of the death of a relationship. That's not even the word I want to use. But watching that relationship sort of unravel or change in ways that we can't predict. It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy, what are your thoughts about this sort of experience?
Well, I sort of had the same experience as Robin with my mom with Alzheimer's. It started out, she had some other issues too. But I ended up being mom's caregiver 24/7. She ended up moving in with me. That's what she wanted. Not necessarily what I wanted, but I managed. um, but near the end, when she could still walk a little bit, but needed assistance, and I was feeding her, and I found that taking her for car rides through the countryside made her happy. And I would do that with her. And sometimes we stop at McDonald's and get some ice cream on the way home. So those are wonderful memories that I have of us doing. And just a lot of the conversation that we had was more one-sided for me because she had a hard time talking. She knew who I was probably up until a year before she passed. But I remember one of our conversations when she could talk. One day she was upset and I was like, what's the matter? And she says, where's mom and dad? Of course, they had passed. And I'm thinking, going, how do I handle this? Either way, it's going to upset her because she knows they're not here. But if I tell them they passed, it's still going to upset her. So I took either road was going to be hard. So I just said, I'm going to be honest with mom. And I told her that they had passed. And she was upset, of course. But then I changed the subject. I gave her 5 minutes and then I changed the subject. I said, let's do a puzzle together. Because she loved doing puzzles and we did puzzles together. When she became bedridden, and she couldn't speak, the nurses that would come in and help, they were like, she knows who you are. When you leave the room, she gets upset. She says you have to stay with us. I said, okay. So, but it's hard to see your loved one go that way, But I remember, getting up in the mornings going, okay, what are we going to do today? What direction's mom going to be in? She liked music. The further she got along into Alzheimer's, she wanted to listen to preschool music. She loved it. She was upbeat. It's like, okay, we'll listen to it. It's just those little things, just to make her happy. Was it easy all the time? No, no. So did I get upset? Yeah. A lot of times I would just go outside and take a walk, take the dogs and go for a walk. One night, did I lose it? Yeah. There was one time I lost it, went outside on the back deck, kicked the 5-gallon bucket. My neighbor was out back going, "Are you okay?" Yep. He understood he was taking care of his mother-in-law. So, but I'd go back inside with a smile on my face and give Mom a hug and said, "Mom, I love you."
And we are so going to get into self-care about this in a little bit too, because
Yep.
that's different too. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I so admire that you found the things and met your mom where she was.
Mhm.
Now the wheels on the bus are going to go through my head all night long, but it feels really nice, so I don't even mind.
That's her favorite. That was her favorite.
Oh, good, because it's one of mine. That whole meeting someone where they are, whether it's because of dementia or something else. And that's what
Mhm.
Dawn spoke about in a different way as well. So I think that's really important. And I really want to acknowledge that that's something you did.
Mhm.
Sandy, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on this?
So my mom passed from Alzheimer's as well. Um, it was kind of complicated. It was early onset. She was in her mid-50s when she started showing signs, but the denial was within the family. I don't think she realized that she was declining. And my relationship with my mom was different from my siblings. My siblings lived a little bit further away, and my dad had just retired. And so I think he started to see things. And the timing was kind of funky too, because I was just getting sober. And so I was kind of like stuck in my own mind and stuff when we were first starting to realize this. But so my siblings just didn't see it as much. My sister's kids were really little at the time. And my mom, when she first started to decline, if she was around a little kid, she was just going to act like a little kid with that little kid. And that was very normal for her. So, I mean, my sister just wasn't going to see it because she was just behaving like she normally would around little ones. So it was a struggle to get her to the doctor, really, because it was just something that nobody wanted to see. She was way too young. So when we finally did that, I went for a walk with her, and she was, still mobile and could talk. She was starting to lose speech. I asked her if she felt any different, and she said no. And I said, "Do you feel more forgetful than normal?" And she said no. So she kind of didn't realize it at first. And the dynamic too was my siblings and I were always so we lost our older sister, when we were teenagers. Well, my baby sister was a little one. And so watching our mom go through that, we were extremely protective of her. So then to watch this, it kind of, I think it shook us. I think it would shake up anybody. Watching my mom struggle so much throughout her life, it was pretty bad. So, I would, take her to get a pedicure when she couldn't clip her toenails anymore. We would go to it was called Yoga Devotion, this thing at a church where it was very just stretches and yoga type stuff. And it was dark, and, so we would do that, and once in a while go for a walk. When she started to kind of sort of forget who people were, she would confuse me and my older child. Because when I was my child's age, we would have been identical. And my older one would change hair color all the time. And so my mom would get a little bit confused. And I think she started to confuse my dad with his brother, who was around a lot. So, but it was always people that resembled each other. And she really would get a little confused about my husband, because in as my mom was declining, my husband's growing this big long beard.
He's in
And-
disguise now.
But, you know, once we told her its favorite boyfriend, then she'd get all, you know, that was the little joke. She really liked him, and that we called him favorite boyfriend to her. And but you know, just like with Robin's mom, she really, really loved music. Or was that Kathy's mom? Maybe both. But she loved music, and that would kind of bring her out of her shell. And she loved to joke about having lots of boyfriends. And so, you know, if we were getting our toenails done and a gentleman would walk by the window, she would, you know, wave to him and, you know, act like she was flirting with him and stuff, and get kind of goofy. But, and, you know, that was like her personality would come out even as she was declining. So it was comforting, I guess, to see that she was still in there somewhere. Toward the end, it was more of a release that she was going to be able to go and not suffer anymore. She had suffered a lot throughout her life, on and off throughout her life. And when she passed away, it was just kind of an acceptance and kind of a release. And of course, I didn't want my mom to die, but I also didn't want her to suffer anymore.
That.
Right. And, you know, watching her decline all the way through, watching her struggle it was a little bit triggering, because, you know, we had watched her struggle after my sister died, and that was kind of a secondary trauma from losing my sister. So, yeah, I just kind of feel like, you know, that woman has taken a beating in this life. And it's just, I felt like, you know, and I'm not the type of person to say, oh, this isn't fair. But that was one of those times where I was like, come on, this is not fair. She's had enough, you know. So that was a struggle for me.
And I think it's a fair statement to say that. We are definitely going to dive into some of these, how we manage our feelings and our own emotions. I think there are three people who come to mind to me immediately. One of them was a relative who was in her 80s, and she too was dealing with dementia. But here's something interesting. She liked me so much better. And I found that so interesting. She had never really cared for me very much. And somebody else in my family and I went to go see her, and she was less than kind to him, in sort of a snarky, fun way, which he took well, but he'd always been her favorite, not a pedestal. And suddenly she really liked me, and she had stories to tell me. And she was telling me about how things that she did when she was a young girl, is she'd say, you know, they lived, she had grown up in the woods, and she was saying, you know, today I got 2 deer with 1 shot. I have no idea if anyone could do that, but she was very proud of this. And she was telling us about a lot of the things she did as a young girl. These were things I don't know if it might have been imagination or if they were true. But I'll be honest, it's the closest I ever felt to her. And personally, I thought, what a gift. And I think about these 2 gentlemen that I know and love, and both of them knew they were dying, one from very natural causes after an accident that had really damaged his entire body well over 30 years ago when he was 29 years old. He didn't die till he was almost 70. So imagine that. We never talked about him dying. We saw his decline, where he finally became bedridden, which was really hard for this tough, strong man. But we never talked about it, ever. And I think about the other man who's very important to me. He died of cancer. And I had an opportunity to spend, I guess, about 10 days, 2 weeks with him as he was about a month and a half before he died. And we never talked about it either. There were so many things we didn't talk about. But it was interesting with him. We knew he was dying. This was not a secret. And somebody was coming to visit them, and he sat down and had a conversation with me. We're on the way, because he said, you know, this person is going to tell me that if I would only pray harder, I would be fine. I would recover. He says, they've told me this. And this was not a shy man. This was not someone who was uncomfortable standing his ground. But I remember saying, would you like me to tell him he could leave? I can stay in the room and tell him he can't be there. And I remember him sort of lighting up that somebody had his back. His wife totally had his back, but this was someone else. And it might be one of the times I felt closest to him. And it doesn't mean any of these things were easy by any means. I mean, he was very long distance. So I didn't get to talk to him very much. And truthfully, I'm not sure we knew what to say, even when I was staying with them for those couple of weeks. We don't always know what to say, do we? And as I'm hearing all four of you talk about how confusing and upsetting and exhausting it can be, I think about the miles I put on the short time I went with them. I lost a full size, which doesn't happen to me from walking their little dog in hot weather. It was fine. I could use that. But, so these are some things that there's a lot to unpack here about how do you reconcile your feelings while you're going through it, or don't you? How do you take care of yourself through this? Have you had a chance to connect and tell someone, I love you isn't always I love you. Sometimes it's here's your favorite salami sandwich. Have you had a chance to do that or not? What have some of these been like for you? And anybody, feel free to speak.
Well, I have a hard time expressing my emotions, and yeah, I can relate to having meltdowns, but in private. My mom had fallen on the steps. It was actually before she was formally diagnosed, but she was going through testing. She had fallen on the steps outside and broke her knee. And I remember coming home from the hospital, and I got in the shower and just bawled my head off. I hadn't cried that hard in so long. But it was just, it was kind of, I think I might have in that moment accepted it more than I had before. She wasn't an unsteady person. She wasn't the type to fall. She wasn't old enough to be unsteady, like I said, I'm not good at expressing my emotions. It was taught you don't do that. And so, just to allow myself to cry was kind of a big self-care for me.
Sandy,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, you go.
You said something I find really interesting. You said that was sort of acceptance for me. And it sounded like that sort of opened the gates to your emotions.
Yeah, because, in my world, I have dealt with death before, and I have dealt with it close to me before. So you kind of don't have a choice but to get yourself to understand life and death and the cycle of life and things like that. And so I had already learned that she wasn't the first close person to die. And like I said, she had already suffered so much, but this, for her to go like that is just cruel. And so I think, my tears were because I knew what we were facing. We were going to watch her suffer more. And just kind of accepting that, that, okay, well, this is where we're headed now.
That acceptance piece. That's big, isn't it? And not everybody in the family or the close dynamics, it's not always family, but not everybody who's close handles that the same way.
No, well, and at this point, it wasn't even widely. I think everybody had started to know, okay, well, something's going on, but I don't think that they saw how far gone she already was. I think by the time, how, I don't know if you guys have researched at all, like the stages of Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever. And if you look at the 7 stages, she was like end of 3rd, beginning of 4th by the time she was diagnosed. And so it was that easy for the people that don't see her regularly to miss it. And a lot of it was, like I said, that was, right around the time that my dad retired. Now he worked opposite shifts from her. So the people that were around them usually would have been either just around my mom or around my dad on some other occasion, but never both of them together. So, he's just retired. He's happy as a clam and he's very chit chatty. And so she wasn't even trying to talk. So, it was really easy to miss. And so, but when I got to the hospital, they had to, cut her pants off of her. And they hadn't put her in a brace yet. I don't even remember if they had brought her in for x-rays yet. I can't remember how far along they had gotten with her. But when I walked in, she was trying to put her pants on. She was trying to stand with one leg broken and put these ripped pants back on because it's time to go. She wants to go home. Completely not comprehending that she cannot, So yeah, that was, I knew that she was declining, but I didn't, that was in that moment I realized how far gone it was. And it was with everybody being on a different page with it. And I had this idea that, oh, we're going to come together and we're going to be a team. And we all handled it so differently, and that didn't happen.
That, I think, in my experience, that doesn't seem to be that unusual. How about you, Dawn? Are there other people around that were on the same page as you? What kind of dynamics did you experience?
For me, I was it. My mother and I, because they had moved to Colorado. My sister at that time was still in Florida. And so she would come and visit them. But, I was like close. I was only 200 miles away. So whenever she came, I would stay at home so that she could have time, with my parents or our parents. And she was the one who actually realized how bad Dad was as far as not being able to breathe, because I didn't realize it, because I had, I just didn't realize it. I didn't realize it. And they lived at 8,000 feet. So, that adds another difficulty, even if you didn't have a heart or a lung problem. So when she came, that was actually when they, she was the impetus to take him to find out, what was going on. And he'd already had the surgery in 2000. So, you just don't think about, oh, well, this one's going to fail too. And that is what happens. So anyway, it was, yeah. So I think at first, whenever she realized it, I was kind of pissed off because here she is, 2,000 miles away. I'm the one, I moved to Colorado primarily because my parents were there. And so, but I got over it real quick. And as far as my mom went, I don't know. My mom was not a communicator. And even after he died and all, and I took care of her. She was with me for the most part after that. I just don't, I remember her feeling bad that she did not take good care of him, because she would get frustrated with him and angry and yell at him. And, Dad was such a sweet person. It was like, of course, for me, I wasn't there enough. So I never ran into that. And, they had a very quiet life. The only people who would come by and see them would have been, friends that they had made since moving out there. So, and that happened actually with every person that I had to deal with who was dying or near death. I was it. There was nobody else around.
So I'm curious, we've all had various experiences where we've lost people suddenly, unexpectedly, tragically. We've all had experiences where somebody we care about is dying for an extended period of time. And many of us, it's more than one person. So there have been various experiences. How does, there's no good way to ask these questions, is there? So feel free. It's very different. And I know one is not easier than the other. They're just different, aren't they? But have you found yourself coping in different ways with different sorts of loss? The extended, it really is that long goodbye. Will you be here tomorrow when I see you? And even if you're breathing, will we be able to talk? Will we be able to connect? Do you find yourself saying things that you don't want to regret? What kind of differences have you experienced? And what might you suggest to somebody who's going through it?
I know with my mom, since it, it did take some time. With hers, it was a little bit of a roller coaster, because my son had passed away, and I wanted so desperately to be able to talk to my mom. And she was there, but she wasn't there. And many times it would hit her, and she'd realize that he was gone. And it was like she was reliving it all over again. So that was hard for me to witness, and I'd cry with her. And seeing her go through so much versus my siblings, like you were saying, Sandy, you were seeing it from a different perspective than your siblings, and the same here. And when my mom did pass away, I actually felt that peace for her, and I felt like she was free, where my siblings were crushed. I mean, they had a really hard time, and I was sad. Nobody wants their mother to pass away, but I felt like she's free from this horrible, disease she's been dealing with. Like she's at peace. So for me, it was easier to cope with at the time of her passing. I felt like I grieved more leading up to it than I did when it actually happened.
Well,
I felt like I did my
good.
grieving. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were able to say what you need to say ahead of time, so there's not as much regret. Yeah, and I agree with you too. And also, we have another thing in common. So my child died while my mom was declining, and my sister had also died from suicide. So both my child and my sister. So my mom had lost my sister to suicide as the mom, and then I lose my child as my mom was declining. And I just, like you said, so desperately needed her. And she, for a little window of time, she did comprehend what had happened. I remember, shortly after Katie passed, I put the picture of my sister and the picture of my daughter in front of my mom, and I told her they're together now. And my mom says, "Why did they do that?" And that means that she could comprehend it, but her language was going. So I knew that she understood what had happened, but and that was as much comfort as she could give. She let me put my head on her shoulder, and that was enough. As long as she understood.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she could put together that, she and I are now in the same boat. I don't know if she understood that I am the mother of this one and she's the mother of that one. I don't know how much, but she did know that they were both. Yeah.
It's complicated stuff, isn't it? So often when somebody we care about is very ill, and we might not want to, maybe we're not ready to accept the possibility that this is where the road is going. Have you had the experience of caring for someone like that and just wanting to scream at them, "You need to fight this more. You need to take this step. Why aren't you taking that step?" if you've had that experience, how did you navigate that so that you could be at peace with them? Or not? Maybe that didn't happen.
I think my dad went through that with my mom more. He was the main caregiver and I wasn't around enough to get frustrated. I tried to encourage him to, just go somewhere. I'll hang out with her, just go somewhere. But he knew that she got a little agitated when he wasn't there. So, but yeah, I think he got frustrated sometimes and wanted her to just snap out of it. Why can't you just, but I think that's caregiver burnout. You need to, yeah.
And it can be a lot of, is this really real? If they would have taken this step, this wouldn't be happening. We can be really angry about it, can't we? We can be angry at them. We can be angry at doctors. We can be angry at the system. We can be angry because how dare the sun come up today when I'm feeling like this? And when I talk to people, I hear about that anger being really profound. And I feel like that's very fair. Did any of you experience that sort of anger? And if so, what did you do with it? Because I know you all to be pretty anger-free people.
Not so much on the long goodbye, but for instance, with my son, he sustained a lot of injuries in his accident, which obviously we didn't know at the time because, with an emergency, they're just treating what they can at that moment. So you don't always know the extent of it. But I remember feeling angry. I kept thinking, why didn't they try one more time to revive? Why didn't, all these things were coming out. Like, what do you mean? Why couldn't they give him one more shot of epinephrine? These things like that, one more. Why couldn't they try one more time? One more time. And I had a hard time with that, like accepting that.
That seems reasonable to me. I think about the one person that I was telling you about. And I think how frustrating it might have been when this man came to his house and said, well, if you'd only pray harder, you'd be okay. How frustrating this was for the person I cared about, but also how hard this might have been for the person who truly believed you're just not trying hard enough. So I think about the people that I think, well, why didn't you try a different medication? Why weren't you willing to go through another round of whatever sort of tests or trials? And for me, that's taken some soul searching, a lot of walking to reconcile that this was their choice and I didn't have to agree with it, and understanding as best we can understand when we're not in the soup. We're not, we see it externally, but we're not the one going through that experience. I can't believe it's easy for them to make those decisions either.
And as hard as it is for us to hear it, like you said, it's their decision. And my mother-in-law, she was diagnosed from 1 month to the next with stage 4 leukemia. And she had been fighting another battle that mimics leukemia. And she had already outlived the life expectancy that they had given her. And so she was at peace with it. And we weren't. And she was like, I'm not strong enough to go through the blood transfusions. And she said, and it was her choice. She chose to stop taking the medication, which we knew it could be days, maybe a week. And so we had to respect her wishes and understand that she was at peace because she was talking like all of us are right now. And she was good with it. And so we had to be okay with it too.
How did you get to that place where you could call it okay with it or at peace with it? Maybe there's another word you use.
Knowing that she was okay with it was ultimately, I think, what, for instance, for me, because she was welcoming it. She said, I have outlived, the time frame they gave me. I have done so much in my life. I'm at a good point and I'm accepting where I'm going. And she was like, she felt good about it. And I think that's what, like sitting there talking to her, because I took my kids, we drove up there to basically say goodbye, which I have to say was one of the hardest goodbyes ever, because you know what's about to happen and they're speaking to you normal. And, but she was, you know, she kept saying her prayers and she kept saying, I'm good with it. And I think that's what ease was, not that it made it easy or anything, but it was definitely, because the drive up there, I kept thinking, why doesn't she just try one more, you know, one more transfusion? That could buy her some time. That's not what she wanted. And once I got to see her and talk to her and realize that's what she wants, those were her wishes, not ours. It's not for us to be that selfish person when she's content and she's happy and she's at peace. So that made it more accepting for me.
I feel like we should clip what you just said and play it over and over and over again. That whole, am I being selfish if I say, well, why don't you keep doing this? Even though I know it's painful and exhausting and probably incredibly emotional and scary and all kinds of other words that don't even come to mind at the moment, when my overriding feeling is, why would you leave me?
I have
And
this
when
thought though, like if, you know, after watching my mom's decline, you know, and I've seen people, I haven't been super close to a cancer, decline, but, you know, they've been in the family, of course. I don't think that I would want people to watch me go through that, because I know what it's like to be the watcher. And I know what it's like, you know, when the family is, you know, everybody's on a different level of acceptance and sees things through a different lens, and everybody just wants to help and help and help and help, but we're all button heads. You know, I don't think that I would want people to watch me decline, to be honest. So I think that, you know, like what Robin's stepmother, you know, and especially like if it's, you know, she was already given, you know, oh, you're already sick, you don't have much longer, and then another sick on top of it. Are you going to treat that sickness and just, because cancer treatments are pretty
Brutal.
miserable from what I hear, buy her a bunch of miserable time, or just let her go in peace? You know, to be close to somebody and have to be forced to say goodbye, that hurts. But I think I understand where Robin is coming from, that maybe it kind of excelled the healing. Maybe, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I can see how it would maybe soften it some, knowing that the person knew it was coming and they were okay.
And that's almost a little of a battle between the heart and the head too, isn't it? You want them okay? Darn it, why not try this? These are complicated things, and there's no one right way. I think about so many people that I care about have died very prolonged deaths fighting cancer. And some would rather you didn't see them. And some are perfectly happy with, turn on the game and let's have a party. So there's not a right or wrong way to do any of this either, is there? Did you find that was it important to you, is what I should ask, was it important to you to make sure that certain things were said and communicated, that you were able to say certain things, that you were able to hear certain things? And did that happen for you?
For me, it absolutely did. My mother-in-law had said some things to me that day that I'll hold dear to me forever. And I mean, they were harder. It was very difficult. Because we were saying goodbye. I mean, and it was a real goodbye. And, I was leaving to come home with the boys and stuff. And she grabbed my face and she said things to me that were so heartfelt. And, and I said things to her, and my son had just passed that same year. And she had said to me that at first she didn't understand certain things about how I was grieving and stuff. But she said to me, then she said, I get it now. I get it. And one of the things I asked her, because she was falling asleep in the room, like taking naps, while we were there. And she was talking in her sleep to my son. So when she woke up, I said to her, do you see Ryan? And she said, oh my gosh, I keep seeing him. And I keep talking to him. And so I said to her, I said, when you see him, will you give him a hug? And she said, I will do more than that. And then we joked because she always liked red Mustangs. And she said, you better be picking me up in that red Mustang. And so we had a little laugh in there too, but it was really difficult. But I think at the end, I mean, we exchanged the I love yous and stuff, but there was just a few things said that over the years, I don't think were ever said, but it was said in that moment. And I'll take it with me and I'll hold it dear to me forever.
As I hear you, that sounds like probably the best gift you could have ever given and received.
Mm-hmm.
I know when my dad was near the end, when he was passing, before he went to the hospital, he would talk about angels. And he said, Kathy, there's really angels. I wish you could see them. And that just meant the world to me. And he had gotten a book when he was going through his chemo. He had gotten a book from the doctor's office. They had books there you could take home and read. And he says, I'm reading this book now because I know angels are real. And it's a book about angels. And he's like, Kathy, he says, you need to read it. So, and it was good, but it was just so nice. And then the day I walked in, he says, he was sitting in his chair and he says, Kathy, I've got some bad news for you. And I figured it had something to do with my mom, but he says, my time is up. The angel says, my time is here. And I was like, okay. And I wanted to say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But I just like, I have to listen to him. He's got a message that he wants to tell me. And then he says, Kathy, I love you. I love your husband. He's the best. And he's like, please take care of mom. He says, keep her in her house. Because that was his thing. But he already knew that we already discussed it, that mom didn't want to stay there by herself. So, but he says, have her stay here as long as she can. And I said, okay. And then he says, and come see her just like you are me. And I said, I will. So, and then 2 weeks later, he was gone. So it was hard. It's still hard today. So,
Kathy, I want to say how much, I don't even have the words for this. Appreciate this, ladies, because you're never going to see me this often without words again. That you didn't push back when he told you this. The grace that took and the courage that took. The vulnerability. Wow. But as I hear you, it also sounds as though that made you really close with one another. What a gift you gave one another. That's what I keep hearing. Dawn, did you have the opportunity to say things that were important to you and to hear things that you craved to hear?
Yes, I did. Well, especially with my mother. My father and I were very close, and so there were no problems there. Okay, there was nothing that needed to be, healed with he and I. But my mom was another story, and I'm trying to think how many years I took care of her. Maybe around 6 years, I guess, something like that. And but all that meant was that she was with me, because she was very with it. Okay, my sister and I would talk about, mother can remember things we don't remember. So she was the one everybody would go to. I feel so lucky that I really have not had a dementia or Alzheimer experience. I really haven't, personally at all. And so anyway, so I did a lot of self-discovery, like the last year of my mom's life in particular. And I remember I told her, well, I would tuck her into bed, and it was funny. And she would say, it wasn't like she needed it. I just wanted to do it because she was here, you know? And so, oh my God, I can remember her saying, she says, it's like you're tucking me into bed. I'm like, yes, I am. I said, I just enjoy doing this. And my mother was not someone who ever tucked me into bed. Okay, she did not do that. And my father is the one who would read us stories. My sister and I would read us stories, you know, when we were little. My mom just wasn't she wasn't that type of person at all. I know she loved me. And, but I know at one point I told her that I forgave her. And I forgave her, and I told her specifically what I forgave her for. And I remember her just kind of looking at me, because this was probably when I was tucking her into bed. I mean, like I said, she took care of herself. It was just something I wanted to do. And I remember her looking at me like she didn't know what I was talking about. And it was like, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was for me, not for her, really. And so I felt so lucky to be able to come to a place where I could actually just be with my mother and appreciate everything about her. And that wasn't going to happen a year before that, believe me. And so then, you know, she got hurt. She just fell and went into rehab. And then it was time she was finished with rehab. She could either come back home to be with me, or she could stay at this rehab place. And I honestly was surprised when she said, you know, I think I'm going to stay here. And I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, I was like, whoa, okay. And she loved it. She absolutely loved it. And she was only there for like about 3 more months before she became dehydrated. And then she was gone within 5 days. But that time also was like, because I knew how she felt, you know, she didn't want her life to be extended. And she had talked, even let's say 6 months, well, even a year, at least a year before that. And she would say things like, why can't I die? Why can't I die? You know, it's like, she was ready to die, and she didn't have any, she had osteoporosis. That was it. Yeah, I mean, she really didn't have any life-threatening things at all. So and I know she quit drinking on purpose. I know that, because she decided she needed to take things into her own hands. And that was the only thing she could do. That was the only thing she could really control. And so, you know, she was with a mask, and I remember in the emergency room, you know, they said, well, if she had an obstruction, then, you know, we could do something about this, but it's pretty awful. And she was like almost 95, I think. And I said, can you just keep her comfortable? And I asked her, I said, is that okay, Mom? And you know, it's like, she was like, oh, like, thank you, thank you, thank you, you know. And so those, you know, all of that stuff wasn't really hard for me, because we had talked about it. I knew what she wanted. And so to carry it out was not hard for me. It might have been harder for me if I had had anyone else in the family to discuss it with, but I really didn't. It was up to me. I mean, I talked to my sister about it, but she, you know, she was always like, well, you're the good one. You're the good one. And thank you so much for taking care of all this. And, so I was always, that never made me angry either, because I just realized that we just had different, I don't know, different ways of dealing with stuff. And that's just the way it was. So, yeah, that was my last one. She was the fourth one. So I think I made sure that I said everything I wanted to say. And I mean, to me, it is experience, a certain part of it. So.
And I find it interesting too, because when I hear all four of you and I think about my own experiences, and you've all heard me say, since you've known me, more communication is always the answer. So it's okay if you have a belly laugh that I have these people I didn't have these conversations with until after they died.
Yeah.
And the truth is, even when I think about it now, and if I revisit in my mind and my heart with that experience, I still don't have that ability, but I can talk to them where they are now. So I guess from my point of view, I would like people to encourage someone to sort of future themselves. Say maybe 7 or 8 months after this person has died, will I be at peace with what I did or did not say? And if there's something I need to say, how might I say it to them? Is it in a letter? Is it by playing their favorite childhood song? Because what a way to tell your mom you love her. It's not always the direct language, is it? Or maybe it's by letting her call you, or not someone call you by another name, or respecting their wishes without telling them how wrong they are for making the decisions that are really hard for us. I know we're close on an hour here, and so, but I want to give you each a chance. Do you have any final thoughts you would offer someone who's going through this? Because we all know it can be excruciating. And when I think about it, I always think, if there's something we can do to have fewer regrets after, I think
I
that
would
makes
say
sense.
a support group, because this was my mom's decline was, it was before I had really discovered support groups. And I thought, oh, well, I'm not the main caregiver. And, people who have the families of dementia and Alzheimer's, is always tons and tons of support groups for the caregivers. But I kind of didn't consider myself a caregiver because it wasn't consistent daily. But yeah, there's all kinds of family support out there. I would do that differently if I could go back and change things. Yeah.
And God willing, you won't have another experience like this, but it's something to hold on to if you do have to.
Yeah.
That's really good. How about you, Kathy? Have you got any suggestions for someone? Is there something that you would reinforce or do differently?
I would say to communicate, find out what your loved one really wants for end of life. Make sure all their paperwork's in order. And if they don't have it, get it done. And just the communication's the big thing, keep an open mind. It may not be what you want to hear, but it's what they want. And just let it, your feelings roll off your shoulders and tuck them in your back pocket and do what they want.
That is so good, and that's something we didn't even touch on tonight. So we can do 2 or 3 more about this topic, can't we? About having that conversation of what they want, not only what might be considered a good death for them. Think about one of the people that comes to mind absolutely had a DNR, do not resuscitate, and then a very brief time before he died, he said, "I want to rescind that." And of course, people needed to honor that. So how do we have those conversations? That's so good, Kathy. I'm so glad you brought that up. How do they want to die? What do they want things to look like afterwards? Well, we're going to have another nice long talk about that. How about you, Dawn? Have you got any thoughts that might be helpful for someone, or things that you wish, things you're glad you did or that you would do differently?
Well, I tell you, when it came to my dad, because my mother, like Sandy was saying, my mother was the primary caregiver. I wish I had been more forthcoming and putting my nose into it. Okay. I wish I had, because it would have made it so much easier for them, because they had no idea. They didn't understand when the doctors said, well, here's a support group that would help you with what it's going to be like after he has this, valve replacement surgery. And they were like, oh, we don't know we don't do that, if nothing else, if I could have done it myself in Denver, which I'm sure I could have found one there, I let my mom and dad take care of that. And I could have helped a lot with that. And I didn't feel like it was my place. And I will tell you, it is your place. It is your place. If you see that someone could benefit just with a different viewpoint. That's all, just a different viewpoint of, well, hey, maybe this would really help. It could have made my dad's life and my mom's life, both of them, a lot easier during that long process. So it's like, especially with your parents, because I think it's hard when it's your parents, because you will always be the child too. And there are times when you should be a little more aggressive. At least I should have been more aggressive. So that's one thing I would definitely say. And also to speak your mind, because once again, it's a different viewpoint. And people who are going through the end of life have got their own viewpoint, which is fine, and it's important that they do what they want to do, but they may not even occur to them that there are other things that could be done, or that things could be different. And so I think it's important just to let them know that.
It's really good. That's really good. Thank you, Dawn. How about you, Robin?
I think it's important to remember for anyone going, through experiencing that with their loved ones, is your feelings matter too. So make sure you are taking care of yourself. Make sure you breathe. It's okay to let your emotions out. It's okay to have that meltdown and just let it, just let it out. I just think it's real important to make sure you're taking care of yourself while you're assisting or helping or the caregiver for somebody else.
I think that's really brilliant, and it matters, doesn't it? Because what I've heard from each one of you, you're talking about support groups for the people who are involved most closely, but also taking care of yourself, because this is someone you care about. You're involved in some way. So this whole idea that we want to respect the wishes of the person who's dying, absolutely, but that doesn't mean you don't count. It doesn't mean you don't count. So it's a continual rebalancing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a continual process. And there will be mistakes. And there will be regrets, and there will be sadness, but there can also be incredible blessings and gifts and cherished moments. And because it's another life experience. So we've got lots more we can talk about this one, but I'm glad you could all join me today. And before we go, I would like each one of you to be able to introduce who you are. And I'm so grateful because during this recording, I am joined by 4 master grief coaches. These are incredibly talented women. And so, Robin, would you like to say who you are and share any contact information you might like?
Yes, so I'm Robin Stegall. I'm located actually in Texas. Um, I do have a Facebook page. It's Robin Stegall, a Master Grief Coach. Um, it's not a group that you have to join, so please feel free to go on there, like it. You can message me through there if you'd like to get in contact. And I also run a nonprofit organization called Riding for Ryan, and we push motorcycle awareness and provide scholarships to the children of fallen riders. So feel free to check that out as well. You can check that out on Facebook.
And all of this information will be below. I'm so glad you talked about both of those things because you share an awful lot of really good information on your Facebook page. And I love the Writing for Ryan organization. I think that's so powerful.
Thank you.
Dawn, would you please tell people a little bit about you and where they can find out all the amazing stuff you share?
So that's part of the reason why I have this very long name in front of my face. Because it's my pen name and it's also my website. So DawnLaurenAnderson.com. I'm a writer and master grief coach, and I write a blog about every week now, and I've been doing it for years. But now it's focused really on grief and how we take care of ourselves and get through our grief. And so the best place to find me is DawnLaurenAnderson.com, because all of my other ways that you can read about me or connect with me are there.
Wonderful. And I strongly suggest that anybody subscribes to your newsletter, your blog, and reads it because there's always really good stuff in there. Thank you, Dawn. Kathy.
Kathryn Tate-Hildreth from North Carolina. And I have a Facebook page. My personal page is Kathryn Tate-Hildreth. And then I also have Journey Back to Joy. That's a Facebook page also that you can find me there. So, but if you go to my main page and then go in about me, you can see about the Journey Back to Joy link to there.
And Kathy shares wonderful, wonderful things. Every time I look at your page, it always makes me feel warm and taken care of. I love the messages you share. So I highly recommend following Kathy as well. Sandy, you're muted again. Are your dogs in the room?
Well, there's always the threat that there's going to be something startling. Hi, I'm Sandy Kashnina, Master Grief Coach. Not up and running yet, but when I do, I'll put my information on Sandy Walden's website.
Sandy, you are amazing. And when you have the time, I know because I think what people sometimes don't realize is how much you're doing the work already when you're here. And so I'm so glad you're all here. And I am Sandy Walden. I never told anybody that, did I? I am a master grief coach. I'm hard to find. My website is sandywalden.com because I like to be mysterious. I offer master grief coach certification for anybody who is ready to help others take this journey that we know is so difficult. And we all know that when we reach out to someone else, they're also reaching to us, and it's deeply healing for the coaches as well as the people they work with. I also offer a 12-week group. I've changed the name, ladies, because it was getting confusing. So it is, oh my goodness, Embracing Grief Healing, a Journey to Peace. I know, sometimes life is that way. The caffeine wore off. So what that is a group that meets 2 hours every week via Zoom. We have a different topic every week. We have a topic that's written and recorded, and a guided meditation and journal prompts, and another conversation that's specific to that topic. It changes every week because it's kind of the magic sauce to be with other people who are walking this journey. So thank you for joining us. Please, if you've found value in this, like, subscribe, and share it with others. I want to thank all of you for joining me. You're amazing. Namaste.